2 hours after Kennedy's assassination, Vice President Lyndon Johnson was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States aboard Air Force One, the presidential plane. Usually, our impression of him is nothing more than that he was the biggest beneficiary of Kennedy's assassination. During his tenure, he massively increased troops in South Vietnam and fully escalated the Vietnam War. He also loved to talk dirty and had extramarital affairs with many women. In fact, this Texas redneck has done many other things, which can be regarded as a model of grassroots counterattack, and his domestic affairs during his term have far-reaching influence. Hello everyone, I am Fei Xiang. I talk about people and events. Audiences who like it can follow me. Johnson was born in rural Texas in 1908. Both his grandfather and father were Democratic state legislators. However, due to investment failure, the family was extremely poor. Johnson worked part-time in high school, and he did not go to an Ivy League school like most American presidents, but went to a normal college. Perhaps also influenced by his family's political genes, Johnson is good at speeches, debates, and has strong organizational skills. In order to earn money to complete his studies, Johnson took a leave of absence to go to a remote segregated elementary school in Texas and worked as a teacher for 9 months from 1928 to 1929. The discrimination and injustice suffered by non-white children profoundly affected him. Years later, when Johnson, as president, signed the Higher Education Act to strengthen university resources to provide financial aid to students, he recalled this past event: "If the door of knowledge is closed to them, this country will never have peace." In 1931, Johnson graduated from Teachers College and worked as a teacher in Houston. He was hired by Texas Democratic Congressman Clayburgh. As a secretary, he went to Washington with his boss and entered the political arena. It was the Great Depression, and most of the young people working in Congress had little money and lived in the cheap Dodge Hotel. Johnson also moved in and took 4 baths and brushed his teeth 5 times on the first day, just to stay decent and visit as many as possible to get to know the more than 70 congressional secretaries who lived here. He was so ambitious that he aspired to be president at this time. Less than 3 months after arriving in Washington, the 23-year-old Johnson became the Speaker of the small Congress composed of all aides in the House of Representatives. At the age of 29, he was elected to the House of Representatives and a member of the Naval Affairs Committee. Known as Curly Hair, Johnson's drive drives him to work more than 10 hours a day and stay busy on weekends. After the outbreak of the Pacific War, he transferred to active duty in the Navy. Of course, he did not participate in frontline operations. Instead, he was responsible for the investigation and supervision of the Southwest Pacific Theater with the rank of major. It is said that in June 1942, Johnson volunteered to serve as an observer for the air raid on New Guinea. During the battle, the plane he was traveling in was damaged by Japanese Zero fighter Ace Saburo Saburo. Fortunately, he returned home safely without any serious injuries. Wartime experiences earned Johnson 4 medals. After the war, he was successfully promoted to the Senate and served successively as Senate Minority Leader, Majority Leader, and Democratic Whip. He cooperated to varying degrees with Truman and Eisenhower. He is a political veteran who has been familiar with Congress for more than 20 years. He is proficient in the power game. He lies, betrays, and adapts to the situation as naturally as eating and drinking. He is considered to be the most powerful Senate Majority Leader in American history. He meets each member of Congress to understand their ambitions, needs and tastes in order to manipulate and deceive them. Johnson has a unique way of persuading people, which is called Johnson therapy. It is usually conducted one-on-one, and the treatment is carried out wherever the other person is found. Standing 1.92 meters tall, he has a strong aura, his face is close to the target, his facial expressions are rich, and he speaks quickly. His tone combines various emotional elements such as excitement, contempt, pleading, accusation, complaint, and intimidation, making the target almost hypnotized. The experience: "I just want to end it soon, whatever you say is what it is." This process may take 10 minutes or take up to 4 hours. In short, Johnson will not give up until he achieves his goal. With this unique skill, none of the bills he introduced during his presidential term were vetoed by Congress. In the 1960 U.S. election, Kennedy won the Democratic nomination. Out of comprehensive considerations, he chose Johnson, who was nearly 10 years older than him and experienced, as his partner. After winning, Johnson also became vice president. The vice president of the United States has no real power. His main function is to take over when the president resigns, becomes disabled or dies. However, he can manage some affairs under the authorization of the president. But Johnson also had a bad relationship with Kennedy. Their background experiences were very different. Kennedy and many of his cabinet members, including his brother Attorney General Robert, openly despised the Texas redneck and considered him rude, but of course he was okay with it. Kennedy asked Johnson to run the Space Council, assess the space race with the Soviet Union, and give him several small diplomatic missions. At 12:30 noon on November 22, 1963, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas. You don't know if the assassination was a lone wolf operation or part of a larger conspiracy, and Johnson demanded an immediate, full-force handover to stabilize the situation. 2 hours later, he was sworn in as president in the presence of Kennedy's widow Jacqueline and others inside Air Force One at Dallas Love Field Airport, and then returned to Washington. This approach dissatisfied many people, who felt that he was too eager to take power. Among the many conspiracy theories triggered by Kennedy's assassination, Johnson, the biggest beneficiary, has always been the main suspect. To this end, he ordered the establishment of a commission headed by Chief Justice Warren to investigate. The committee determined that Lee Harvey Oswald was the sole assassin of Kennedy. This conclusion does not convince everyone. After all, there are too many doubts. I personally think that Johnson should have some knowledge of the assassination, but the truth may not be clear until all relevant files are declassified. A year after taking over, Johnson won the 1964 election in a landslide. He used the term Great Society to describe his internal affairs, which was a series of huge plans aimed at eliminating poverty and racial inequality, covering civil rights, education, healthcare, the environment, etc., and was comparable in scale to Roosevelt's New Deal. Johnson used his superb persuasive skills to successfully promote the passage of these bills, which had a profound impact on American society. He pushed through legislation after legislation, including civil rights bills that had been blocked by Congress during the Kennedy years. Although the Great Society has disadvantages such as inflation and excessive welfare burdens, it always brings real benefits to the bottom class. During Johnson's term, the unemployment rate dropped to below 5%, the number of households with an annual income of more than $8,000 doubled than before, and the number of people living below the poverty line dropped from 22.2% to 10%. 2.6. If there had been no Vietnam War, he would have been one of the most awesome presidents in the United States. When Johnson took office, the United States had 16,000 military personnel in South Vietnam. Shortly before Kennedy was assassinated, South Vietnamese President Ngo Dinh Diem was overthrown by a mutiny, and the situation was chaotic. Defense Secretary McNamara assessed that if the U.S. military did not end, South Vietnam would be over at any time. Johnson was also worried that if he was not firm on the Vietnam issue, he would be seen as a coward and the United States' international reputation would decline. It was decided to escalate the war. In August 1964, the U.S. military took advantage of the Bibu Gulf incident to join the war, but fell into a trap. As the number of casualties continued to increase, anti-war sentiment spread across the United States, riots continued, crime rates soared, people became disappointed with Johnson, and divisions emerged within the Democratic Party. In 1968, Johnson, who suffered a disastrous defeat in the primary election, announced his withdrawal, and Republican Nixon won the election. After leaving office, Johnson retired to his Texas ranch and picked up the cigarettes he had quit smoking due to heart problems. From that moment on, he fell into a self-destructive spiral. On January 21, 1973, Nixon announced the cancellation of 142 pieces of legislation in the Great Society Plan. The next day, the 64-year-old Johnson died of a heart attack. He always wanted to be remembered as the Great Society, but for many years his name remained associated with the Vietnam War. That's all for today. Friends who like it, please follow me. See you next time.